This video is sponsored by thong.co.uk. Hello. In this video, I'm going to show you what might be potentially your first and last modular synth. This is the Music Thing Modular Workshop System. That's a good time, isn't it? Don't know about your ambient record, mate. Yep. Flippin' heck. So the Music Thing Modular Workshop System is a complete, very small modular synthesizer. What's the power of a modular synth? Well, with a little patching, it can suddenly become a kick. And the next moment, it can become a kind of snare. And then a kind of hi-hat. Then you can make it make a little chord. And then you can wire up any number of extremely filthy bass sounds. And for good measure while you're doing that, you do one little acid one as well. And then, after a happy evening of sample collage, all those little pieces get worked into a track idea. So Workshop System is a modular synthesizer. It makes sound when you patch things together, and it can also process other things and make them sound different and more interesting. And that's really the essence of a modular synth. The thing is that, generally modular synths involve a whole process by which you build and specify one. There are off-the-shelf modular synths, but they tend to be a lot more money than this thing is. And so the idea is that this is like a little one, but still with 13 modules that can do a whole load of stuff. But the point is that it isn't a modular synth where you're endlessly tempted to fettle and change the parts, get a new filter, get a new this, get a new that. It doesn't do that. It's just about it being what it is. You might be like, I don't have that module that does this. Well, you might be like, I don't have an attenuator. Where's that? And then you go, oh, actually, you can use the stomp box as an attenuator by just putting something into the return and using the blend control. Or there's no VCA. The ring mod is a VCA, so it's idiosyncratic, limited in many respects. But that is why it interests me, because I have got so much stuff in this room, so many modules. But what I really appreciate is the sense that this is an instrument, a kind of playground where one person has said, here's an interesting collection of parts, and you can have fun with this. And you might try and do some things and you can't quite do them, but you get close. You can kind of fake it in some way or like make a hacky version of it. Or indeed, usually, there's a way that the computer can do it. I have plenty of other things that can further sound shape, sample, take elements that this creates. It doesn't have to do everything at once. But as we'll see in the video, there are absolutely ways that you can make it make entire pieces of music. You could do whole performances on this. You just have to work within its limits. Now, would you be better served by a subtractive synth or, a non-modular thing? And well, yes, you well might. I mean, there are many options, such as things like the no coast, although they look wacky and complicated, or indeed things like the Moog Mother 32 and so forth. These will just offer far more immediacy and precision. They're much faster things to get sounds on. But for sure, they are more limited in terms of the scope of sounds they can make. If you just want to make like badass bass sounds, this can do it, but it's not its strength. It's weirder and more 70s and sort of idiosyncratic and kind of quirky in the way it works. What this, I think, excels at is its notion of being a kind of laboratory. I love the idea of just sitting with this and a sampler, being able to just make material, weird, quirky noises, firing up twist cards on the computer and just going through all the digital modes and then modulating them and just making it freak out and then recording all of that and then slicing it up and taking good bits and making tones out of them. That's what modular synths are really good at, and this is a modular synth, so it's good at that too. What's actually in the workshop? So the workshop system is 13 modules. In terms of what the modules actually are, well, we have a mixer with 4 inputs. We can pan 2 of them for stereo. We have 2 oscillators, which are like the sound makers, sine square oscillators, so called because they make sines or squares. A sine wave sounds like that. But these ones are bonkers because they're connected with these little FM knobs, so I can turn this up and make the bottom one freak the top one out. Happy days. There's also a square wave, which is a more aggressive sound. And that's nice because there are 2 filters. So if I go through the filters, and there's bandpass and high pass and resonance, and these can sound very, very aggressive if you wish. Now, there's a mixer here. You can do insane things such as, for example, you can mix using stack cables. So if I take the outputs of 2 of these square waves, I can actually sum them together like this into one input. We'll go out through the filter and I'll show you the slopes. The 2 slopes are LFOs or envelopes, which is to say things that move sounds over time. They make it do that. You can also make it so that they open when you click the little button down. And there's different shapes for them, and there's 2 of them, which is nice. Plus, you can also compound the 2 filters together for that kind of bandpass thing. These are also slew generators, which is to say they can take audio input from the stereo in, because for sure there is also a stereo input, which means we can take sounds from the outside world and feed them into this world. What's his name? Sean's laptops.
Press play on their system.
And so then I could put that into the slopes whilst also putting it into the filter, and then I could go out from the filter into my mixer. And then I could go out from the slopes, and then I could go into the FM with the filter, remove the filter with our voices. That's a good time, isn't it? Or I could turn this off and then just go through the ring modulator. And ring modulators just make whole loads of interesting tones. They let like two sine waves become a lot more interesting, do all manner of stuff. And there is actually some invisible patching. Two oscillators go through the ring mod by default, but if I change it,
fan or rhythmic, whatever they're doing with this.
And this top one, because I didn't plug into there, now ring modulates that.
It is good, but it's also the kind of randomization. It's like...
Good time, huh? We have this thing called 4 voltages. 4 voltages is like a minimum viable keyboard, where it will basically... Basically, it will spit out 4 voltages from the 4 sockets, and if you push these little buttons, it changes them. If you push 2, you get another voltage. Push 3 and 4, you get another voltage. So it's like this clever minimum viable keyboard. And we can use it to like jump settings around and kind of play a patch. And interestingly, you can change what the voltages are with this little dial, but it's not random. So it's a repeatable kind of weird keyboard, quirky thing. We also have a pedal input. And this is cool because this means that if you take a pedal, you use the included little wire. Do you see here? There's an output. And then we've got like 350 milliamps, so we can power a pedal. And we get 2 cables, which help us go from the send and returns. Get a weird little like ambient thing with integrated effects. The final 2 things are the amplifier, which is a drive and distortion unit you can use to like externally drive and distort things. And I'll do that later in the video. I just want to show you here that there is a contact mic built into this thing behind the panel. You can literally tap and sort of scrape the panel with stuff, and you get that sound into your system. This then just like opens up another world of stuff, and I should further process that through the filters and the slopes and animate things and ring modulate it. And it's just like everything. But in the true spirit of leaving the best to last, there is something in this that is really very unique and actually truly not found in any other system. And that's the computer. Now, what the computer is a sort of open-ended module. It has inputs and outputs and a couple of dials and a switch. And the idea is that you use these little cards. You get a little collection of cards with the machine. They include a sequencer, a MIDI card that turns this into a MIDI interface so you can play it from your computer, play the oscillators and fire things off. MIDI, this one. And then also there is a reverb card, which turns this into a reverb effects processor. But most interestingly of all, it comes with a blank card. Now, you can burn blank cards to be different things. You do this in a very simple way. You plug them in, you take this knob off, plug that in via USB, and you push the button and push this button and then drop files onto it. Then that card becomes something else. For example, it could become Twists, digital oscillator. Or any number of things, including some absolute gems like Chris J's Utility Pair, which is a whole ocean of different programs that you can choose, and you can run 2 of them at the same time on a computer. What this lets you do is have a little bit of that taste of what it is like to own a modular synth. And when you change one module, you change the whole system, because that one module informs, gives you new ways to push around or interact with the things you already have. We can't physically remove modules, but we can author computer cards really easily. You can write over these cards as many times as you like, because this is both limited and limitless in equal measure. What a weird combination. My friend Tom Whitwell, who made the workshop, recommends this very patch as the place everyone should begin. Because the principle behind this simple patch is what we'll build on to do everything else. I'll go from the sine wave output, turn down the mixer, plug it into 1, and turn it up. Oh, yes. And what we've made is a really weird little wobbly instrument. It's the kind of thing that the Radiophonic Workshop would have killed for in the 60s. Well, they kind of did. Well, they didn't kill anyone, but they did have oscillators very like this that just made simple tones. And then they layered them together using tape machines. They'd have loved to have some effects, wouldn't they? And Lord, lucky us, because I have effects here. And I'm going to use the pedal output to power this DD7. And then turn up the blend. Adding a delay like this is really wonderful. In fact, if you have a long delay time and high feedback, then we can do things like this. Many loops later. So we can play into a delay with a very high feedback and make these weird fruity little like atonal, micro-tuned little melodies. And all we're doing is we're just playing a sine wave and a volume knob. This is possibly the simplest instrument you can make with this instrument. And it's just an interesting basic starter. Can you make music with just a sine wave, a volume knob, and a pitch knob? Nothing more. It's a challenge. Maybe you can. Maybe it's atonal and weird. But the point is it's fun to play. And it's an illustration that you can build a little system. Give yourself a few things to do. And maybe with some way of recording it, be it just a simple delay pedal, could be a DAW, could be a sampler, then you can build a track with just this most basic of elements. And we return to a sine wave. Let's make this more complicated, and we'll do this by turning up the FM control. What the heck? What's happening is the bottom oscillator is telling the top oscillator what to do with this little knob. And suddenly these two most basic of things make actually quite complicated sounds. And just things get even weirder. And you can make these big tones. I can imagine taking that sound and recording a couple of seconds of it and putting it in a sampler and then making a pad out of it. Now, we've only been listening to sine waves up to this point, but of course there are square waves too. So this is the square wave running through the top filter. And indeed, we can use this to filter and take high frequencies away. If we increase the resonance, then it's going to accentuate the frequencies at this position. Well, I'm making a duck face. We get a wonderful thing. What I could then do is I could take the output of this bottom oscillator and feed it into the FM control. And what that's going to do is it's going to move the big knob for us. Ooh. Liquid. So another thing we can do is take advantage of the fact that these filters are in series by default. The output of the bandpass and high pass of the top gets connected to the bottom. So if I then plug into the low pass of the bottom, and what I get is this wonderful sort of vocal thing, because you have almost enough peaks to start making the same kind of resonance that human vocal tracts produce. Now we've got these things called slopes. And slopes are basically envelopes or LFOs. LFO is a thing that moves up and down slowly. I move these dials to change the speed that they move up and down. So what I do is I take the output of a slope, and let's do the top one to the top one, and feed them into the FM controls. And that with delay. Ugh. Yeah, mate. Ugh. Yes. Things get out of hand in a way that is fun to have in hand. Okay. Let's do a more traditional dual oscillator sound. And we're going to play it using the computer, because the computer can be a sequencer. And here, with the little keychain that comes with it, this little fella, is the Turing. Now, the Turing machine is a sequencer, and it's a lot of fun. What I did is I plugged the card in and I pushed this button to activate it, and instantly this becomes a Turing machine. Here, overlaid, I will put a little graphic showing what the controls of the Turing machine are. Adjust the length. Oh, yeah. Now we hear a really weird, interesting counterpoint, where the Turing machine is playing both oscillators independently, one slower or faster than the other, and that's controlled by this knob. So I can make that second oscillator go crazy fast, like chiptune it, or I can slow it down with this knob. Yeah. Oh, I love that. And I think every good sound deserves a little bit of delay. This way you hunt for melodies with a Turing machine, and you set up a sort of complementary tuning. You play the two sounds, because we've actually got two independent sounds, kind of smashing them through these two filters. You could, of course, send each oscillator independently through its own filter and use its own independent slope. And I'm not doing that, but you can. But that, of course, as with all modular synthesizers, is just the tip of the iceberg. before it gets deep. Down there. We should mention the fact that the workshop is kind of a DIY machine. So if we take this out of its little case, we can see that it's like a little desktop unit. But the idea is that you buy this as a kit, and all of the sort of surface mount, difficult soldering, quote unquote, that's done for you. So what you need to do is the soldering of all of these pots and jacks, and then screwing the whole thing together. That's not for absolute beginners. So you probably wouldn't want this to be your first thing. But you could absolutely do a few small little kits and then build up to this. All is involved is basic, competent soldering of big, chunky parts, the final sort of assembly. And it could be done in a couple of evenings at a very slow pace. So it would be a lot for your first job, but almost certainly wouldn't be too much for your second kit. So one of the other programs, which is free and runs on a 2 megabyte card, is called Twists. Twists is a port by Tom Waters of a mutable instruments module called the Braids. And so this means when I put it in and fire it up, the computer is now 6 different oscillators. And digital oscillators are a lot of fun. Here's one that just sounds like multiple oscillators all at once, but that's just with one wire. Here's one that sounds like wavefolding. Wow. Yeah, that's a good time, isn't it? Yep. What if I then feed that? Yes, because then these oscillators can go low frequency and become low frequency oscillators. Flip the neck. And now I want to take a tiny little detour. Because I'm going to show you a video that I shot when I was researching this, using this very bit of Twists, what I like to call instant French house, where by modulating this Twists card and adding a beat made from a filter, then you just start to make a little proto track. Here I'm using the bottom filter to do a high pass drop. Now by moving the slopes, making it super slow. And that slope, which is generating the kick and modulating the computer, suddenly turns this into like a super trippy kind of ambient. This was one of those moments where you're like, oh yeah, there you go, happy accident. That's one twist card that I authored. Here's 6 more on another card. Wavetables. Noise. Everyone likes noise. Can I introduce you to what is unquestionably the best noise generator that I've ever heard in a module? I should qualify that statement. It's just one of the most remarkable. And it's called Backyard Rain. And what Backyard Rain is it is the sound of rain in a backyard. Rain was recorded in June 2023 in Seattle, Washington. But the most important thing is the big dial. Yep. That's right. What is actually happening is this is actually crossfading between three strengths of rain. And so in effect, it feels like you're God. It feels like you're able to turn the dial and the rain intensifies. And then the rain subsides. You reduce it until the rain is just a little trickle. Of course, what then if you modulate this with CV, which you can do because this input is a CV input. Everyone likes a little bit of jam, ambient jam that is, and here, yes, you have so many sound sources that you can make drones by feeding back the filters. You hear here the filter feeding back by itself. And here I have a computer card which is running low pass gate and quantizer. This is the utility pair by Chris J. I've got some speech for texture, which is me interviewing the creator Tom Whitmore, my friend Tom. And then the low pass gate is a low pass gate that also has a built-in 5-step sequencer. And what I like about this is that you can't change the melody. It's unique to the card itself. Each card will have a different melody. Lord only knows how that works. You can obviously quantize the output of it, which is what I'm doing here. And that changes what the 5 notes are. Is a nice reinforcement here. And here with a simpler melody, we can increase the resonance to introduce these 2 extra tones made just by the filters, carefully tuned. Couldn't be simpler. Next, I'd like to try a little bit of audio processing. And what are we going to process? We're going to process an 808, of course. Yeah, nice. We can turn it down. That's the kind of more dry signal. What then? So there's a couple of different things. The filters are an obvious one. Fatboy Slim would like it. And we might like to move these using But then, could we create an envelope follower? Which is to say, if we take the output of the audio, we run it into the slopes, and then you use the output of the slopes to also control that filter, then yes, you can. What I'm doing here is I'm using the audio and I'm running the audio into slopes, and slopes is kind of smoothing it out and turning it into a voltage that I am then using to control the filter that is acting on the audio. And then by playing the loudest sounds, like the drums harder, the kick drum, it'll push up the filter. Really nuts. But then there's another thing we could do, which is that we could ring modulate it, couldn't we? Flipping heck. Yes, I want to show you another program card. This is the 910. Now this is a card that's in development, made by RYK, and the 910 is a legendary effects processor. And what a 910 is it's a pitch shifting delay. Now I had an almost irrational amount of fun just feeding the 910 with a sine wave like this. Oof, make a bat out of that. And now on Tom.
Different things you like.
Radio, because of its complex and its loud.
If I may respond to that musically in some way,
The rhythm of it is interesting,
or it might be because also then you've also got
in the shortwave you've got things like
That's the stuff right there.
what's the chart? Laurie musical mouse.
Laurie Spiegel's Music Mouse. Now on 808, which is the dictionary definition of a good time. David Bowie would like it. That's a good time, isn't it? Yes. That's so good. Listen to how it's turning the little rim shots into a melody. It just really, really, really tickles all my bits. flipping Nora. That is so good. So yes, I do believe, sorry, that this will be like one of the cars that you would buy. But I strongly recommend that. So I show it to you in this, with that in mind. If I tap on the machine, we actually hear the taps because there is a contact mic behind the panel. This is the sound of the included reverb card, which, by the way, has a sequencer built in. No, really? Don't know about your ambient record, mate. Of course, I could then CV modulate things. Always a good time. Yes. Yeah. Freeze. What we haven't done so far is experimented with another delicious type of jam. Techno jam. And here with an 808 twists card and a key step. We can hunt for tones and then sequence them. And I'm not using an external mixer here. You're just hearing the output of the workshop. Everything runs through it. Filtered drums. Creating little tones with resonance now and then. Here, let's have a little techno jam with the Deluge for drums. And the Deluge is sequencing workshop via CV Engage. And I've got a little patch with twists cards. I'm also driving the Deluge through the amplifier. That's what's giving it that kind of burn. Techno, is it? You get the idea. Yeah. You can then use the the voltages to hop between settings. A bit more techno. I think we're missing a trick here. And the trick is I've got a spare filter. So let's filter the drums that we're also distorting. That is the sound of digital oscillators ruling. Flipping heck. Nice.
There's no harm in it still being mysterious and interesting. That's why I'm so interested in the kind of workshops and stuff, is how people feel confident and happy when they use it. They definitely don't need to technically understand it. Basically, I only have to do the little extra components. You have to do the difficult bit.
Well, wish me luck.
Good luck.
Good luck. Bye.